I guess to start, just, I don't know, talk about maybe how you've seen the game change in your 40, plus years playing, coaching all the different levels, and maybe some of your biggest takeaways, from that journey first.
Yeah, that's a great question because I had the opportunity to play when it was kind of first happening. I mean, I
Right.
played at the University of Connecticut in the later 70s, and that's right after Title IX happened and collegiate sports for women were under AIAW, and which was the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. Then in the 80s, it went to the under the NCAA umbrella. So, there's definitely a lot more opportunities for today's athletes, but I think some of the biggest things that happened and evolved over time was the technology of the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
The ball used to be white and the bats were so heavy. Now, they're a lot more, I guess what I want to say, they're more
Proportional.
proportional to the athletes, and the athletes have gotten stronger, and there's just more emphasis on analytics and metrics. I know the last few years we had used Dartfish, but we got into Synergy, and to be able to break down every single pitch, I could break down for slappers. Against lefty pitchers, against righty pitchers, what pitch they were throwing in various counts. And I think analytics and metrics tell a story about a player, about a team. And so Synergy, just for example, made it very easy compared to, you know, 15 years ago where you're trying to watch video and it just took so much longer. And then again, the metrics and somebody like 643, just being able to have that kind of information available,
Yeah.
kind of over your career, say your career, Haleigh, where you hit most of the time, being a pull hitter, and was it deep? Was it in the gaps? And so just being able to get that equipment right at that information right at your fingertips was awesome. And I
Right.
think, the rules have been evolving to promote the game, to make it better, to make it more fan friendly. And so I think, there's always challenges with rules, and every year there's an emphasis on one rule, and then the next year there's an emphasis on something else. And it's
Yeah.
usually, what comes out of the World Series or something like that. But now we have review, and you can have a couple of reviews a game, and sometimes that really helps. And, they've changed the base running one from last year. And so I think that they tweaked it a little bit. So I think that's helpful. And I think there's so much more media coverage and
Yeah.
more TV opportunities, and that's the way you're going to promote the game. There's some very knowledgeable announcers, color people. Um, they're the athletes, what they put on the field, the coaches, and the work that they do. I think with having TV and then conference expansion, I know I was looking at in the earlier years when we played 8 conference games, 8, because there weren't many people in the
Mm.
conference. There was only, at 4.
Yeah.
And then it went to 6. And now, you're playing 24 conference games. And so it's so much different, the number of games that you play. I mean, you can play 56 games, and then if you go postseason or you go to the World Series, you're playing in excess of 60 something games. And
Right.
so I think, the sport has exploded in many good ways, and I think the coaches have done a good job of staying consistent or staying with helping the game grow. And so I think that's so important for the sport itself. And it's just a fun sport to watch.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so talk about your experience in terms of like coaches need to change and adapt to, like you said, the change of the game, but as well as the change in culture of kids, their parents, like all these new waves, of generations coming in. How were you able to do that and keep your head for 40 years?
Yeah, I think you have to realize that things are always changing. I mean, there's certain things that you have to be adamant about, I think, and that's your standards and your beliefs. And for me, it was program first, then
Mhm.
team, then individual in terms of making decisions. And
Yeah.
so does that mean I didn't care about the individual? No, not at all. I think
Right.
the individual is very important, but when you look at a program, your standards and creating a culture are really important. And what is it that your absolutes are that you just won't accept?
Right.
And there's others that you can have a little wiggle room on in terms of, sometimes there's just situations that happen and you have to make that adjustment. But coaching is making adjustments every single day. You're dealing with so many different personalities, and I absolutely loved it. And there were definitely hard times, and there was definitely people that were more challenging, but there was also the people that were great to work with, and they were like, you hate to say a coach's dream, but they just got it. And but I think that today's athletes, they have so many more challenges. I think social media, everything's at their fingertips,
Mhm.
and they want to be recognized. Their parents want them to be recognized because they put a lot of time and energy. If you think about a travel ball parent,
Right.
all the weekends they give up, the hotel rooms they have to get, the
Money.
travel that they're doing. They want to see some kind of result for their investment. They want their daughter to be able to get a scholarship somewhere. But now it's not just the scholarship, it's the scholarship plus the NIL deal. And so it makes it a lot more challenging for college coaches to be good consistently.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to have that backing, that money. It's becoming very professional for sure with football, basketball, but it's filtered down into the other levels. And so I think that for today's athlete makes it tough, tougher in a lot of ways. I think it makes it tough for the college coaches. I just think there's a lot more challenges and things that you're dealing with. When you didn't have social media, you had a little more focus.
Hmm.
But at the same time, with technology, you have a lot more that the players have at their fingertips in terms of even learning and seeing videos and everything that's out there. And so then it's just a matter of trying to filter down what's most important.
Yeah.
And as you're dealing with these athletes and helping them to achieve their goals.
Yeah.
So that's that's one of the things that I think is really important.
So all of the coaches have talked about that I've been doing this with the amount of resources these kids have at their fingertips. But then a lot of times in conversation, they have circled back to, but they're still having to teach like the game on a level that you wouldn't necessarily expect or want to at those high levels. You okay? My dog's right here too.
Yeah, correct. I agree with you. I agree.
So I
Feel
think my
free.
question is like, where do you think that disconnect is? In terms of them having, the ability, like you mentioned, like the data makes things easier as a coach. But you would think it also allows, the training process to be easier for athletes. But, obviously there's probably an overstimulation factor there. But if all of these coaches have said they have so many resources, but they still come to me with a lack of understanding, what do you think that's about?
Because I think, they don't necessarily understand the game. They want to be successful at it like that. Because
Yeah.
everything right now, like again, is at their fingertips. And so putting that time in to really research the sport or understand the sport. I grew up, I didn't have a lot of female models, role models, or softball. Like a Joan Joyce was definitely somebody that was in my era that really was amazing athlete. But I used to listen to baseball, watch baseball, and I learned the game. And then you make the adaptations with the base running or,
Mhm.
those kind of things, and,
Yeah.
adding slapping years later. But I think that that part of it, it's available, but they have so many other distractions. How many posts are they getting for the day? And those kind of things, that are they really investing in the game and learning the game? I don't think they really always know the game,
Right.
and think the game. And so that part is the part, like, they may be able to do the pieces of it. You're training them with their footwork,
Mhm.
and you're training them with their throwing and all those little things to make them a better athlete. But are we training, or are they learning the game? And that is where there is a big void. I think you have to constantly teach the game because they're so programmed. I mean, it's just like a little kid, like when they're a year old, 2 year, they free play and they have the best time, and they do all kinds of fun stuff and they're great, right? Then they go to school and they get put in a little box, and you can say this and you can't say that, and you can do this and you can't do that. And so I think they get pigeonholed and they don't look beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think too that there's a disconnect between, I don't know, maybe it's the messaging that the travel ball world is sending, maybe it's the messaging that the private instructors are sending, like it just seems to me that it's wild that there's still that big of a gap given all the time that they put in. But then some coaches have said travel ball, you're only really playing in games in the grand scheme of things, right? Like some of these teams play 120 games in a season, and then they only practice very, very little. And at your level, it is the opposite of that, right? So maybe that's the disconnect. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I understand technology being a factor, but still, there's so many leaders. I don't know. Do you think there's a disconnect in just the travel ball culture as well?
Well, I mean, I think they all go hand in hand. And I think college coaches wanted to see kids and evaluate them, be able to evaluate them more. It just got crazy, just even being able to talk to a kid, or I just remember going to Colorado to recruit in my early years. And we would do camp in Stasio in Boulder. Okay. And then
Yeah.
we would go out to Pearl Street, have dinner with other coaches and walk around and enjoy. And my last so many years of coaching, I would go to Boulder, and then you'd have to go to Longmont and Louisville and all these places. And I used to drive and wave at Pearl Street sign. Never got to go there again because there were so many games, and I think it became this thing where you're trying to get these kids to be seen, so they have to play all these games and all these showcases. And so I think the showcases, not that they're a bad thing, but you're not necessarily always playing the game. They're just showcasing their skill. How many, swings can somebody see this kid, and that college coach is going to be there, so that player is going to be there. And so I think some of the actual, like you said too, kids basically traveling with that travel team, but not necessarily practicing, because the teams have become more on the national scale and who can go to the best tournaments. And so they're getting players from all over the country. And so that it's just not realistic for them to practice together. So they're only going more showcasing these, really good players maybe at this particular tournament. So, I mean, both kind of did it. The coaches
Yeah.
and the travel coaches trying to keep up. And so it just got really crazy. And,
Yeah.
and I think that I don't blame any one group. It's just sometimes things evolve, and then you've got to trim it back a little bit and make it more manageable.
Yeah.
I think too, I think it's really good for players to play more than one sport and train in another sport, just to give you a different perspective. And like volleyball, softball, I
Mhm.
always had a problem with basketball, softball because of the knees and things like that.
I know.
Yeah, but I felt like volleyball, softball was a good combo, but just another sport, track, whatever it is, something where you're training your muscles differently and you get a break from being so pigeonholed. But getting back to learning the game, I mean, that is a matter of just watching college games and learning from those, not just little snippet highlights, when somebody hits a home run or
Mhm.
something like that. And it's investing in that. It's just like if you invested in a career or you're in college and you want to major in something, it's the same thing.
Right.
So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I hear you. So because I'm in Georgia and we're like, hotbed for talent and recruitment, I feel like this entire community has, well, I can't speak for the whole community, but from my purview, everybody kind of has that tunnel vision. And I think it's built like a pretty thick environment here where nobody wants to spend the time on those things because they're trying to look so far ahead. And I get a lot of questions, like, where do you think my kid falls? Where do you think my kid falls? And at the end of the day, like any player could eventually be, a power conference player, but it might just not happen in the time frame that it needs to happen because you're a kid and this window's from 18 to 22. I mean, there's plenty of people in the pro leagues that maybe didn't play for an Alabama and whatever because their development, took its own course at a different time. But because we're here, there's such a major press for that, and it has like instilled this fear if you don't, And so I'm seeing, which I mean, just in a general sense, like there's so much fear of not achieving that, to a point to where I almost think it puts them in a disconnect to seeing the game for what it is and understanding the game for what it is because they're solely focused on that fear and that outcome that's like 4 years from now, you
Sure.
know? I don't know, like what are your thoughts on maybe how it has maybe impacted recruitment, or just the kids that come into the program? Um, just because I feel like nobody's looking at themselves and where they are really right now. It just becomes constantly looking 3 years, ahead, which is good in terms of creating goals, but there's no awareness of the in between. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I
Wordy.
think, just athletes in general, like their fears are, poor performance. They don't want to disappoint anybody, like their coaches, their parents, their fans. And then now, if you attach NIL, I think there's more pressure to get an NIL deal
Hmm.
too. And how do I do that? And how do I get in front of these people so I can get that? And so then people are investing money in you. And so now you create even more stress and
Right.
more anxiety for these kids. And it becomes debilitating because then kids kind of doubt themselves and they're putting so much pressure on themselves for those next 3 years. I watched this movie last night, Unstoppable, and it was amazing. It was a guy that wrestled for Arizona State. He walked on it's called Unstoppable, and he had one leg. And um, his junior year, he wanted so bad to go to Iowa, and so his junior year he wrestled the guy that he beat. He was a state champ, and he wrestled the guy that he beat who came in second that got to go to Iowa. And every night this kid watched Iowa wrestling, and that's what he wanted so bad. He got a scholarship to Lehigh, full ride, everything, and he was from Arizona, but he wanted to go to Iowa so bad. Well, anyways, he gets in the national championship against the guy from Iowa. And he just was so like crazed with proving himself. Even though he was in the national championship, he totally went away from his what he did to get there.
Yep.
And he got pinned, he lost like that. Well, then he talked to his high school coach. He wound up being able to get back there his senior year.
Okay.
against the same guy. Like, what are the odds?
Right.
And he won. But he totally changed his mindset and how he trained. But he was so like, just, I've got to beat this guy. I've got to beat this guy. But he didn't want to be that person. He wanted to leave a legacy and not be that person that came in second and they said, oh, good that you just made it because you only have one leg. He didn't want to be known for having one leg. He wanted to be a champion. And
Right.
so but he had to totally change his mindset. It was an amazing, amazing
I
movie.
just wrote it down. Yeah, I'll have to
I
look at it.
think I think that speaks to a lot of how an athlete's, mind can work. And I just think like Georgia, I loved recruiting in Georgia though, because I do feel like it is a hotbed of softball. I mean, some of the best players that come out of there. And and it was good for us recruiting. We had some great players come to Carolina, but I just think that the coaches have pressure. The travel ball coaches have pressure to get these kids because the parents are investing money and time.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot attached to it.
Right.
And so I think, and then the athletes, their parents, some understand sports and
Yeah.
all that. And other kids, they have a bad game and they hear about it all the way home for 2 hours and they can't let it go. And then it just starts doing things to their mind, I think.
Yeah. How often were you experiencing kids like still trying to prove themselves at your level to a point to where it was debilitating,
Yeah,
you know?
sure. I mean, I think we definitely had kids that did that. They didn't trust themselves. I think trust, building that trust. And even, I always told some of the kids, I would say, look, you want us to believe in you,
Hmm.
but you have to believe in you first.
Yeah,
So I think, those kids, like you had to talk to them about the positives. Like, what do you do well? Like sometimes they couldn't identify what they did well, or if you were doing goals with them. Well, I want to hit 500. Well, okay. So is that really realistic? But how are you going to get there? What are you going to do every day to get a little bit closer to your goal? But 500 might not be, if you hit 150 last year, 500 might not be the best goal for the next
yeah,
year. And so
right.
I think they have a hard time taking the steps and the process, and they go from 0 to 100 and making the goals on outcome goals instead of process. And I think process is so important. And so we're missing some of the process to get to the outcome by, again, the travel organizations, going to these great tournaments, but the kids are not working together. They're not talking the game. I'm not saying nobody does, but
Of course.
I just think those kids that just they internalize so much and feel like they have to be perfect and nobody is.
Yeah.
And so you try to make them understand like, okay, today you may be off, but your teammates are going to pick you up, and then the next day it may be me that's off, and I've got to rely on my teammates to pick me up, and so on. And so I just feel like they get so caught up in that, and it makes them just doubt themselves so much.
So this was great. It brought 2 points to talk about for me. The self-trust thing. So I did not have this until I was a junior, under my time with you. And I have kids come to me who, are having huge goals, like you're saying, but their experience maybe hasn't aligned with achieving that. And I have to have conversations about, my lens of building a lineup. I didn't do it for 40 years. I don't even remotely have the experience, but like when it comes to that, like a coach at the end of the day wants to have trust in that kid in those certain circumstances, right? And they build lineups, in my view of things, based on that trust. I trust this kid under X, Y, and Z circumstances and emotions to still maybe change a game, at any given moment. And I, for the first time, felt like in my career, when I was leading the conference in strikeouts my junior year, but still hitting like right around 300, for some reason, I was terrified. And I remember crying in your office, like, I just don't want you to lose trust in me. I just don't want you to lose trust in me. But when I'm trying to explain to these kids that like having that dynamic, not only with myself, but with you, yields playing time and maybe more experiences, it's hard for them to grasp that for some reason because, like you said, they just kind of look at the numbers and look at the goals and kind of have these assumptions that that's maybe where they feel they should be. I don't know. Like, what is your thoughts on that? Like, player coach trust in terms of playing time, big moments, things like that.
I think that's huge. I think that's probably the biggest key, is the trust that you build with the players, building those relationships, and some of it is, their goals and talking through their fears, talking through their strengths, identifying some of the things they need to work on to get better. And you also have to have fun, with them and let them know that they can be who they are.
Yeah,
And so but that relationship and that trust, and I think a player learns to trust themselves by putting the work in. Now, does the putting the work in always get you the results? Not necessarily. And failure is a huge part of growing and having like a growth mindset. But people don't associate failure with growth and failure with success.
right,
You have to fail to succeed. Failure, a lot of times, makes you uber focused on what you need to do better. I mean, there's so many stories out there of so many people
right.
that have built themselves, whether a business or a better athlete or a better teacher or whatever it is. Um, and so, in order to trust yourself, you have to build your confidence too by going in and maybe hitting 100 balls off a tee, having somebody front toss to you, to feel comfortable just hitting an outside pitch, 10,000 swings to change something. And so then I think the conversations are another piece to know how your coach is thinking. Like, I just felt like sometimes, like if I looked at somebody a certain way, they thought, "Oh, she's mad at me," or "Ooh," and I could be totally on a
Not
different
even on that
page.
wavelength.
That's why I wore sunglasses a lot because I didn't want people to see because I speak a lot with my eyes, I think, besides
You
my
do.
hands. But so I would put sunglasses on because I was concerned about maybe the interpretation of my look, which didn't mean what somebody interpreted. So I think the better that you get to know the player and they get to know you and understand you and what you're looking for. And again, I think just the disappointment piece, that was the thing I heard the most is they didn't want to disappoint, whether it was me or let anybody down or let their teammates down. And so that grates on some kids when you don't have that confidence and you don't maybe have that playing time. You put so much into that one at bat maybe that you get as a pinch hitter and you're like, oh God, if I don't do good, I'm never going to see the field again. And it just keeps like weighing on you or things like that. So
Did it get harder for you over your 40-year span to, build, that kind of reciprocated trust with athletes, or was it always a battle, or is it just always you win some, you lose some in any
I think I
sport?
learned as I went along, like I think in my early years, I was more focused on X's and O's, and you had to do this and training that and all that. And then, and I've always been a relationship type person. I care deeply about people and I want them to succeed and I want to help them succeed as much as they can. And so I've always had it in me, but then sometimes you're trying to draw that line between, you as a coach and a player and not crossing those lines, but at the same time, having them understand that you're a person too. and
Yeah.
that they're a person. I always looked at somebody as a person first, not that they are the best catcher, they're the best first baseman, they're the best hitter. I didn't look at somebody when I looked at you or whatever. I tried to look at the person first. And yeah, hey, they have some great talents, and they're really good academically too. And I mean, there's a lot of parts to a person. And so a coach, sometimes kids are just instantly afraid of a coach. But I think that building those relationships, building your culture, having your standards, and those things, like what is expected, has to
Mhm.
be really clear.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that I think, as a younger coach, I think sometimes you don't understand that as much as it's very important, those relationships, because sometimes kids don't have those as much
Right.
it the at different levels, or maybe even in their home. And everybody goes to their room and they get on their phone and they get into the TikTok or whatever they're going at, and so how many followers they have. So I just think being able, like we had a thing where we had our kids put their phones in a like a shoe rack when they came in, so that they would talk to one another, have conversation, learn how to converse with people, make eye contact, things like
Yeah.
that. And I think that gets lost now these
Yeah.
days. There's just more opportunity to do that, even than when you were, at
Yeah.
Carolina. So,
Yeah. Twitter,
um,
Snapchat, Instagram, those all came out when I was in school,
right.
and y'all
Yeah,
had major regulations on it anyways. So,
sure. Yeah.
given some things,
Yeah.
but
We tried.
yeah, so I didn't have experience with any of
Yeah.
that until I was out of school, really.
Yeah.
Um, so I just had a thought and I lost it, but I'll go back to one note I wrote down here was you mentioned lacking a process. And one of the things in my brain came to like how, as a culture, at least here in Georgia, um, kids are leaving rec and jumping into travel ball schedules at like 9 years old. Do you think that hinders their ability to learn a process? Does that hinder their ability to understand the game and bridge that gap? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think not as many kids are playing at the rec level for sure. And at that age, I think at that age, 9 and below, I mean, they should learn some of the game. It's all going to be dependent on the coaches, and
Right.
their ability to teach and learn. And if they're getting crazy with them at 9, it's not going to be fun for them. I think a 9-year-old, they need to have some fun associated with the game. And I think you can teach the game in a fun way. I was at a couple of rec practices, and I was doing a camp or whatever. And you have to learn how to talk to little kids and have fun with them and get at their level, like even go down low to be able
Right.
to talk to them, right? And I think that part is lost early on.
Yeah.
And do I know the answer to that? I don't know, but I do think that little kids can learn some of the parts of the game, but you can give it to them in little doses and make it fun
Yeah.
while they're learning. And then they could advance to the travel ball, because I think putting so much pressure on them as 9-year-olds, I don't know that that is ideal.
Right.
Do you want to have some kind of standards a little bit? Yeah. But I think that's a different age group. Now, when you
Yeah.
get to maybe 12s, now you can start adding a little bit more to that and then beyond. But
Yeah.
9 and below, I just don't see that.
Yeah. But
I,
still, what you're saying is like still a process of that growth
right,
instead of, a 9-year-old being coached on
right,
a higher level
right.
schedule, you
Yes.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they need to play 60 games and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say. We were talking about trust going back and forth here. It made me think when you were speaking on the self-trust and the trust between the athlete and the coach. I wonder if parts of the travel community is the way that it is because more people lack that self-trust in their game. Also, parents oftentimes don't have their own trust in like guiding their kid through the recruiting process. So I get that, they maybe don't know the things. But I'm wondering now, talking to you, if it's also creating a space where they're like projecting that lack of trust and not trusting coaches as well. Not saying every coach should be trusted, but there's so much jump around, right? It's almost like they don't even get the opportunity to really, I don't know, prove themselves, but like create that time to create that trust. I don't know. It was just a random thought. I'm curious if that inner dynamic of people is reflected in, this travel ball culture, if that
Yeah,
makes
I think it was always refreshing to have a player that was loyal to a team or an organization, and you followed them and you saw them grow and develop. And I think too, you looked at the coaches of various organizations and ones you could trust to tell you the truth or how they were developing their players because you would go and watch some of their workouts and things like that. And so I think that when you saw kids going from one organization to another organization to another organization to another, that kind of sets off a red flag because is it really the coaches or is it the kid?
Right.
And families and not again, it's like what have you done for me lately, right? And the instant like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is something that again, when I was recruiting, you looked at and there were sometimes it was justified to
Yeah,
move for
100%.
various reasons. Maybe, they could get more opportunity on this team to play versus being on a team that was really good and just
Yeah,
stuck with
yeah.
certain players. And yeah, maybe they won a national championship or got pretty far, but this kid didn't really get exposure or playing time. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but when you're going every year to a different team, that is kind of a red flag of, they're either loyalty, lack of trust. And I'm not saying, again, there wasn't justification for those kids potentially,
It
but
just makes you curious.
correct.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm glad you brought up trust with travel ball coaches because that was on my to-do list to talk about with you in terms of recruitment. I obviously am not in a realm where a lot of people will pick up the phone and talk to me because they want to know more about what the kids' process is like in a team setting, and I get that. But I have a lot of travel ball coaches who will ask me, how do I approach these people, da 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 da, and I try to, fan the flame of like, be honest, don't oversell a kid that, isn't ready for, given program. I guess for you, like for my community to hear, you know, how do you build that trust with a coach? To trust the players they might, you know, push your way, nudge your way, send to camps, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. One, is, watching a program, and maybe even looking at other programs that are maybe above yours, say a Florida State at points, where they're getting their players from, but also watching, that coach, having conversations with them, um, and looking at the type of players they have. Like there are certain organizations that they value academics.
Hmm.
And so when you were recruiting at a school like Carolina, that had to align. And then you want to get good athletes. And so if a program had good athletes, they were good students, that was a program we were going to watch. And then you want to get to know the coaches, and then they would bring their kids to your camps. So then you got to know the kids a little better, and then the coaches a little better. And so then you build that trust with them. And then if they sent you somebody and you had good success with them, and then they get to know kind of the players that you're looking for from the conversations. And some of them would be honest and say, I think she's looking, to stay on the West Coast or stay on the East Coast, or she wants a bigger school, or she wants this. And then you get to explain to them like kind of what you're looking for. And then hope, you can get some teams that can align with, with what you need, but the coaches know you. I think that's so important to get to know the travel ball coaches and which ones are gonna, again, align with you and what you're looking for.
Right.
And so, that to me, and there's, the majority, I think were really good. And again, I think you need to be really honest. Like, and some were. They would say, you know what, coach, I just don't think she's gonna be able to do this in your program for you or what you're looking for.
Right.
And so you appreciate that a lot because there's a lot of time invested. And if it doesn't work out, that's a lot of years and you passed up on somebody else for this particular player and it's a bust after a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that part is like so important in the recruiting process is getting to know those coaches.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Because I have conversations with travel coaches all the time, and I'm just like, they're humans, like build a rapport, like and a lot of even dads, that are coaching, they fear those conversations. And I find it funny because I'm like, you speak in front of 400 people for your company that you work for, and all these things, and they're like terrified to talk to college coaches, but yeah,
Yeah,
anyway.
I think it's just making that first phone call and establishing that relationship and talking through it. And, you may never get a player from their program and you keep watching and hoping or, thinking, hey, maybe, we're going to get one, or they think, maybe we can get somebody at a UNC or wherever. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. But I know that there were certain coaches and programs that I knew that I could pretty much get the kind of players that I wanted from this program. I felt very comfortable that that coach would be honest with me and I'd watched them enough to know that.
Yeah, that they're
And
consistent in what they're
yes,
providing and
correct.
building, and their
Yeah,
kids live a process, obviously.
right.
Love that. Okay, so I'm emotional in so many ways, and now I study it and all the things. And my biggest notion is, fear, and how is it rooted in these kids, and how does it manifest, in their day to day and in their training with me. And, people live in the fear of failure, in the fear of disappointing loved ones, and in the fear of being judged, you know, and I have a hard time sometimes. Like I understand it because I've studied it and I have felt this later in my life, those fears. I think in my time with you, there was maybe like a little bit of a relationship with the failure thing, but it wasn't something that consumed me. And I didn't fear disappointing you. I mean, I knew you loved me and had my back, all the things. So it wasn't such a huge factor for me at all. Um, but it's all I hear about and see in these kids that I work with that are 14 to 18 years old. I guess, how did that impact Carolina? Did fear impact Carolina in these last years with that kind of buzzing through today's athlete a little bit heavier? And how did you deal with it?
I mean, I think I saw a lot more of it from COVID on.
Hmm.
COVID really was not very helpful. There was a lot more anxiety. I would say I saw so much more anxiety just about everything. And I think a lot of the athletes, from COVID on, or even in that area, you think about, and I hate to bring these things up, but you think about all of the shootings in the schools and then they had to learn remotely. And I would just remember the freshmen, so they graduated last year that I had, so 4 years prior. I mean, they were there during COVID in college, and the experiences they got, and it was such a different deal for them. So that anxiety and fear was real for them. And you could see it nationally, just more mental health issues and things like that. And so there's a fine line in how you do your job and how you could talk to players, and you had to be really careful about words and what you said and how you said it, because of the more sensitivity I think, generally in society, and that is kind of a microcosm, and you bring it in there. And so that became a little bit more out in the forefront than maybe it was before,
Right.
in my opinion.
Right.
And so it was more challenging. You saw more kids needing more mental health help, but how do you deal with anxiety? And then the anxiety to fear, and then the fear of failure, and then not recognizing that you have strengths, that you have good things of who you are. Like, don't make it just about softball.
Right.
Make it about your life. Like, there's more to life than just softball. And if softball is your way that you're judging if you're good or bad, liked or not liked, it makes it really hard if you're not starting or if you're not that everyday player, right? If you fail, then you feel like you're a failure in life. Like, you have an academic side, you have a family, you have friends. Like, just try to be the best person that you can be, make it holistic and not down this like tunnel of just like you identify as Haleigh Dickey softball, UNC softball player versus Haleigh Dickey, like, I'm smart, I love my family loves me, those kind of things. And so I think that's what I saw more of. And we definitely had a player or two that just was so focused on softball and their identity being softball. And they kind of worked themselves out of it somewhat, but it is a very big process. And, it took a lot of people to do
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
um, I mean, it is a challenge, I think, even right now for,
Yeah.
coaches to deal with.
Do you think that's one of the bigger differences in the kids who have success at that level and the kids that maybe don't have the success that they could achieve or that they, desire
Yeah.
is like, that
Yeah.
kind of locked in and issue
Yeah.
of self-worth maybe?
Yeah. I mean, we had a player, and I haven't been saying any names of people, but we had a player that was locked in every day, one of our best leaders. She was determined. She had a routine. I mean, a routine to even what she ate for lunch, pretty much where she ate lunch every day. But I knew at 8 o'clock in the morning, I would see her going to the cages in the summertime. After that, she would go to class, go eat at her favorite place. And I mean, she was very
Regimented.
disciplined. She had a plan. She knew what she wanted. She wound up being an All-American for us. She was one of the best hitters we had. She was a dual, pitch, played the outfield, good hitter, but she was very disciplined and she had a process. She had a plan, and that's what she did. And she was impressive as a leader. People knew they could trust her, that they could count on her because she had put the work in and she didn't mess around. And she was not afraid to say things that were hard,
Mhm.
which I think a lot of female athletes, that's another challenge, really hard to say the hard things because they want to be liked, and they don't want to be talked about and all those things. And so that she stood out in my mind, like, and still does. And she's coaching now at the college level. And I always think of her whenever I think of any kind of an example of
Yeah.
somebody that had confidence. Now, maybe she didn't some days, and she faked it until she made it. But I was impressed by her work ethic and her attitude and how she prepared.
Yeah.
So,
That's cool. Love that. Okay, maybe discuss for the community that, when you're recruiting or have been recruiting in your, 40-year career there, how much of it is also recruiting a family and that dynamic between that player and the family and that family and the game.
yeah. I mean, you definitely recruit the family. When I would be watching a game, going to games. I would identify who the families were most times, or you kind of knew, or if the coach pointed out, and then you hear some of the things they say. It would drive me crazy if a parent carried their kid's bat bag, something like that. Because these kids want to be treated like adults. Well, and you want respectful kids and kids that have integrity. Well, you want families that have integrity because sometimes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree,
Right.
and in good ways and in bad ways.
Right.
And so I think that is a huge thing. But I, I found that it was really important, especially on visits, to really, that was the easier time, to get to know the families. And I feel like for the most part, I had pretty good relationships with the parents, whether it was the mom or the dad, and then you had to figure out, kind of which one you had to win over for that particular player. And some parents, I think, so one of the mistakes some parents make though is talking for their kids.
Yeah.
When they're on their visits, especially, and you're trying to even get to see them in a different light, different realm. You want to talk to those kids, and then the parents would dominate the conversation, and the kid didn't really get to express themselves.
Right.
But I do think that is another important piece because you want to have that support from the family and have them trust you because you are really the person that those kids are going to rely on for those 4 years, more so than their professors or anybody else. You're
Mhm.
their caretaker, basically, like you're their mom, because their parents may be, 2,000 miles away in California or Texas or wherever. And so they have to trust you,
Right.
that you're going to take care of their child and make the right decisions. Now, playing time is a whole different thing than making sure their daughter stays safe,
Right.
that they're being treated fairly or properly, that we're doing things to help them get their degree.
Do you think that when they're in the recruiting process that they put weight in that? Or do you think a lot of today is looking at all the shiny and the potential playing
Well, I think, I retired in 2023, which is
time?
really like 2 years ago-ish. And it has changed, tremendously. So I think the shiny is really shining bright right now.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, that whole relationship is still important, even
Yeah.
with the shiny, because when that shiny tarnishes a little bit for one reason or another, a little bit at a time, you don't want that to erode your relationship with the parents. You have to have a strong base built with them so that there is that trust built with them and their daughter, and that when you
Right.
call them about something that happened, they're not going to, again, go from 0 to 100, accuse you of X, Y, and Z, instead of like looking at the problem and how do we solve this? How do we make it better? How can we help your daughter? Because we recruited her, right? And you're going to make mistakes in recruiting. Everybody does. But you want to make sure that the parents are understanding where you're coming from and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then you're on common ground somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah. Having been out almost 2 years, mentioning the changes and also just being out of something that you were in for so long, do you look at it any differently? Or are you still in like coach hat? Have you been able to like step away and review things in a different way yet?
I'm still helping some friends with their camps, and I'm still working with some kids, which I feel like the minute I hit the dirt, I absolutely feel like I'm me again.
Yeah.
Um, but definitely don't miss like some of the whole NIL, the whole, like, it's just this rat race.
Right.
But I miss the preparation. This feeling right now, like the season is a couple of weeks away, that kind of, it's kind of an excitement. And
Yeah.
then it's also a little bit, like you think about the softball world, softball players, they've been in school since August, practicing since September. That is a long tunnel to look down to opening weekend in February,
Right.
right? And so that part, but it's a lot, like a lot of time, right? And I'm still filling my time and I'm still staying in it with mentoring. For the NFCA, I mentor three coaches. I'm mentoring a player from my alma mater, from the University of Connecticut this year. And so I've kind of got my fingers a little bit in it. Last year I did some ACC stuff,
Yeah.
analyst. I'm hopeful again that that can happen. So I'm still dabbling in it a little bit, but I think I don't miss. Uh, Sometimes, you hear some of those stories about some coaches and parents, and now they're not coaching at that institution for whatever reasons. And, those kind of things
Yeah.
make it really tough.
Yeah.
And you're always like on high alert, 24/7, hopeful that nobody does anything, gets in any kind of, problems. But, you're always worried about the kids. Like there's 25 kids on your team, 24 kids on your team, and everybody has different things they're dealing with every day and what they bring to the stadium. And you've got to, you're there to help them with their life skills, like never mind just the softball. Sometimes the softball doesn't even matter that day, right? And so it's helping them learn like what's important and life skill, and that's what you really do. And so that part is, it's hard to, that relationship with the players, that's the hardest part that I've had to adjust to, um,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me.
I love that part of it. And I think parts of my frustration is maybe feeling like the sport's gotten away from that bigger picture of like, this is a tool to prepare your kid for when she's not under your roof anymore. It's a controlled, safe space. Everybody agrees to the same rules, so it's like the best place to learn to fail and turn around and use it, for the betterment of like your future. But like I'm stuck in a place where I feel like that's not the community right now. And it's hard on me for some reason. And maybe it's always been this way. Like I have no idea, I've only been, well, I guess I've been doing it 12 years now, which is crazy that I've been out that long. But still, I don't know. I'm struggling with that. That's my favorite part of it is like, let's use all these tools in every category that you're learning here. Hopefully there's more coaches out there that, want to keep focusing on that. Um,
Yeah, and
go for it.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, like for you too, because you're in the setting that you're in, you are working with them one-on-one and on certain elements of their game. And I know you stress a lot with the mental part of the game in addition to, the best part, in terms of contact points and things like that with hitting. But um and I know you do go to games and things to see them in the whole, like in that picture. But the hard part is not getting to necessarily you're coaching one element of it or a couple of elements, and then you don't get to coach the rest of the group, right? You only get to see your person.
Mhm.
But there's a lot to take from that, and the value of even like them understanding how you're trying to prepare them, I think is so important. And I think you do a great job. I've been around you working with some players. I've been at your facility, and I really believe in what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so, um, I think again, trust.
Yeah.
And so it's so your platform is the hardest, I think, because you have to be in that kind of that grind, and they don't see it when they're right there. And then they get put out into this team, and how do they adapt and use it?
Yeah. Yeah. You're the second coach to, shed some light on the instructor role here with that. I was talking with the Barry coach. She's new and here, and I've connected with her and really enjoy her. I'm excited to see what she does with it. But, she's done the instruction part, the travel part, the college part, and she just mentioned, the toughness of that because you kind of are trying to be some version of a glue and a builder, but there are so many other things that they're bringing to the table with their emotions due to travel ball, high school ball, family, and all those things. But yeah, so I appreciate that and all the nice words you just said for sure.
Yeah. I
Maybe I'm
mean,
searching for some self-trust. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know. You said that and I was like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm feeling some of that. And that's kind of given me, you know, a different way of looking at it. I don't know. I have to play with that, toy with it, chew on it, the whole bit. My next question though is you've been a pioneer of the game for forever,
thanks.
my lifetime and some more. And you've done a lot of things, advocated with, NCAA, ACC, right? For all these things for the sport to be where it is today. I guess, having been one of those people to really help transform it, if you could, have some goals for where it's going to go now that you're, out of it and in a different lens, like, I don't know, what do you wish for it? What do you wish for the girls? What do you wish for the growth of this game?
Yeah, I want to see it even grow more. Like it's been so impressive at the Women's College World Series to have seen that stadium just grow from when I used to go there. And I'll never forget standing with Renee Gillespie. We were on the right field side. We were standing on a berm on the right field side. The NFCA out in left field had their RV, which was like had snacks for the coaches, all that stuff, right? And now, and I did some clinics pre the Women's College World Series in Oklahoma, and then to see it now, and every year they've added on to it, second level, and it's
Yeah.
still sold out.
Yes.
That just tells you a lot about the growth of the sport. I would like to see it become more where kids, like we talked about much earlier when we were talking, about somehow that they can learn the game
Uh-huh.
better,
Better.
to make it even better than what it is. But I do think there is a wealth of knowledge out there, and on the internet with the videos, a Natasha Watley, a Megan Remblatt, all these people, Meg Rem, whatever, but all these people that are out there, and Ashley Burkhart, doing podcasts, and Brittany McKinney and Alex Powers, their podcast for the ACC, like.
Yes. Very
There's
good.
such great stuff out there, and like to be able to soak all that up and then, figure out what will help you. Like
Yeah.
I'd like to hope and think that kids are doing that or coaches are leading them to do that. And I would just like to see kids understand the game better and not just be not necessarily robotic, but just like so tunnel visioned on just, a certain skill or that outcome, you
Right.
know, embrace the process and then also try to work to be the best teammate that you can be for your team. Like everybody has a role, not everybody can play, but so many roles that are really important sometimes are played by the people that are not on the field. And that is a hard, hard thing to do. But I would love to see the game grow even internationally. I know the NFCA is trying to do more with that, with clinics in places. I've gone to the Virgin Islands and did one in October. It's like my fifth one over so many years. And those kids, a lot of them, they want to learn,
Yeah.
and one opportunity too, like to come play at the next level. And they just don't have the consistency a lot of times of being able to train and
Right.
play, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Love that. So I'm hearing overall message from you is really like dive into the resources that are here. Like it's here. And if you do it, you're only elevating the entire sport. And then have a process that allows you to build your own self-trust and trust within your coach and your program and all of that. Is that what I'm hearing? I like that
Yeah.
message.
Yeah, I think you need to find somebody that's going to help build you and get you at the low moments and encourage you, encourage you then, but also encourage you when you've achieved something. Like that was the best part of coaching was when you were working with somebody and then they executed it, whether it was in practice or a game. Like that was the fulfillment of wow, this is awesome. Like they got it. The light bulb went off. Something made a difference. One thing you said, and as a coach, you always have to find different ways for different kids to say something. If you say a certain word for one kid, they're like, oh, yeah, I get that. And the other kid is like, what does that mean? And so then you have to work other ways to find ways to communicate with the other player so that they understand what you're trying to get across.
Right.
So that's the beauty of coaching is
Mm.
being able to try. And you're not always successful. I wasn't a perfect coach, but I tried my best to be able to relate to different people, different kids with different words or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
And just having human moments. Like there's a moment with you that I will never forget. I failed a probably chemistry exam because that course didn't go too well for me. And I had to tell you, obviously, that I got like a 35 on a chemistry test, and it was on a fun Friday day. And so we go out there, and I think we're playing some version of football, like touch football and or freeze or something because I remember being frozen, and I had to be on the ground. Well, Allie goes to tag me and like punches me in the face on accident. It's all moving. And I just had this breakdown, like failed my first, real college exam, whatever. And I will never forget to this day you walking over to me and being like, it's okay. You grabbed my face and said, it's okay. You're so beautiful, like, but those moments are so human to help build those connections. Like, at the end of the day, like Coach P thinks I'm like this beautiful little thing, and like I failed a class and I'm beautiful still, like all of that. But I think about that
um,
moment all the time.
that's
Just
so fun.
because in that you're feeling all these other things like shoot, there's a standard, an academic standard here, Haleigh, and you did not fulfill that box today, but you're still beautiful. Like I still love you for you. So
Yeah,
all the things. Really good.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.